So thanks for having me back for another class. Today we are going to paint a wildflower garden. So we're gonna paint, I'm gonna try to remember this without looking at this. A thistle, a clover, an aster, and Rudbeckia or a black-eyed Susan. How did I do? Yes, I got them. I've been having fun trying to find the names of local wildflowers so that I could paint them and learn about them a little bit. So here's a couple more that we're not doing today. Ooh, that's not focusing at all. There we go. A couple more that we won't be doing today, but if we have some time at the end, maybe we'll throw in another one. I don't know, but these are the ones that I want to focus on today. So for your supplies, I move that book out of the way. For your supplies, you need 140-pound watercolor paper. Mine is cold press, which means there's a little bit of texture on it, but cold press or hot press or whatever you have is fine. I just cut mine smaller to save paper. Paintbrushes, I have a size 5 and a size 6. You'll notice there's not too much difference between them. These are just what I grabbed. You can use anything that you have. I prefer round brushes. Some people prefer square, flat brushes, sorry, or different other shapes, but I think round is great for watercolor. This one is a Princeton Velvet Touch. And this one is a silver black velvet. I typically, though, if you've taken my classes before, I just washed all my brushes, so they're sitting in the drying spot. But I use the Simply Simmons from Michaels. Yeah, from Michaels. And they're really inexpensive. $2.99, $3.99. Great to pick up a range of sizes. And those are my favorites. But I've been trying these out lately, and I really like them too. And then you've got your water, just some plain water, paper towel, and your paints. These are tube paints, but I squeeze the tubes out into a palette and I let it dry. I like this because it's just easy and portable and I don't have to squirt paints out every single time I want to use it. And this folds shut if I want to take it somewhere with me. And as you can see, I mix my colors on the side. This side tends to always be my greens because I use sort of the same greens all the time, so I mix them over here. And then this side varies depending on what I'm painting. My paints are primarily Winsor & Newton. Those are my preferred paints. If you need a recommendation for paints, I suggest that if they are just a little bit pricey, there's a Winsor & Newton Cotman series, which is a student grade paint, which is still pretty good. And I like that too. So the Winsor & Newton Cotman. If you go with the more inexpensive paints, like the Prima paints, or well, this was a Prima palette, but I put my own paints in it now. Like Prima or Reeves, or even those little pots from Michaels, they'll be pretty, but the texture of the paint won't work quite like the more expensive paints, I guess. And you don't have to go crazy. Just get your basic colors, your red, yellow, and blue, and a black, and you can buy single tubes here and there as you go and pick up various colors that you like. And there's always sales and stuff. So it's pretty easy to get a collection like this after some time. This wasn't all purchased at once. All right, and if you want to know what specific colors are, or you need, if you have any more questions about paint or anything else, Lorraine put my email address in the chat and you can email me and I'll answer anything. So for today, we're going to start with the thistle. So the thistle, these are very spiky. And then you have some rather graceful looking leaves on the bottom. And then you have a fluffy top. And these are all wildflowers that are found around here pretty much. So for the bottom, I'm going to move this aside for right now. I'm going to use this palette. I have a sap green But if you have blue and yellow, you can mix that together to get a shade of green that you're happy with. Actually, I'm going to start mixing it over here because it's a little bit of a darker green. So in here, I had some leftover dark green that I mixed sap green, a little bit of black, and a tiny little bit of navy blue. And now I'm just mixing a little bit more of that sap green into it. And again, that is a Winsor & Newton sap green. They do not pay me, I promise. I just love their paints. All right, so the Thistle always has sort of like a bulbous shape, right? So we want to create that like pod shape and then the stem first. So, and whenever you're looking at painting something, just take your time to break down the shapes so you're not overwhelmed. So I'm going to paint it a little bit larger than it is on here so that you can see better. So I'm going to paint that. It's almost like a U. And if you feel more comfortable drawing it, you can go ahead and draw it. But I like to draw directly with my brush. And to do that, you have to make sure you have enough water and paint on your brush. Because if you draw with a pretty dry brush, you aren't going to be able to blend anything. I'm just pulling the bottom down a little bit so I can attach a stem. And I'm just going to use light pressure with my brush to get as thin a line as possible. I'm going to want it a little bit thicker, so I'm just going to go alongside it. Press a little bit harder on my brush, and I'll get a thicker line. Just going to fix the neck area. And then I'm just going to darken up my stem a little bit. And that's what I have so far. Just wanted to taper this a little bit more. All right. And we have the base of our thistle. Now, this is a little wide up here, so I'm just going to take it in a little bit, but you can leave it like that if you want to. Maybe your thistle is a little bit more open than mine. I'm just making it narrower, coming in on both sides. Then just blending everything together so it doesn't look like I have an addition on there. All right, once you get the shape where you like it, we have to let it dry. We can't do anything with the top here until it dries. If we were to put the top of the thistle in while it was still wet, it would all run together. So I want it to be nice and dry so that that pinky purple color stays nice and clean. And then also to put the spikes on here, I don't want the spikes to blend into the paint that's already wet, so I'm going to wait for it to dry before I put the spikes. So we're going to put in the leaves. So there are sets of smaller leaves, and then there's also larger leaves on the bottom. I got some fuzz in my brush. If that happens to you, just pinch it and pull it out of your brush. So for my leaf, I'm using really light pressure, and I'm sort of arcing out and up, and that just gives you that shape. And then you have, it's a little bit thicker, so from about here, about a third of the way in, I'm going to push a little bit on my brush till I come to the tip of it. So it gets a little thicker. And then you can see there are two little pieces sticking up off the leaf. So I'm going to do the same thing on one side and then on another side, but they're not as long as the tip. So go about halfway. I'm just using the tip of my brush to make it nice and pointy on the top because the leaves are kind of pointy. And you can see how that looks. I probably should have made it a little bit larger since my thistle is a little bit larger, but that's okay. So I'm just gonna put another one here, but this one, I'm not making as long of a stem. I'm just gonna start it. And feel free to move your paper around so that you feel comfortable with your hand. You also don't want to accidentally like get your sleeve in or smear it. So we're gonna do the same thing, except we're gonna start. So I'm gonna pretend like this part is attached. If you don't want to do that, you can put the long stem. It's up to you. Make it your painting. And then I'm going to come up the side. And then I'm going to come up the other side. Till it looks like that. So we have the basic shape and we have some leaves. There are two little tiny leaves that are above here. And they're just like, just two little tiny wisps. So you just want to get, got more fuzz in here. So what happens is if you leave your paints open for too long, some of the fuzz and dust and stuff that's just around is going to land in your paint. And then when you mix it up, it gets into your brush, and that's how that happens. So I try very hard to remember as soon as it's dry to shut it, but sometimes I'll forget it overnight and fuzz happens. So, but that's okay. Just pinch your brush and pull it off. So I'm just going to come up one side. And up the other like that. And just give two little extras. Now, if you wanted to go ahead and add more leaves, you absolutely can, but I thought two looked fine. So I just went ahead with two. Is everybody with me so far? Anybody have any questions?
No questions yet, Kris.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a little more paint. And I'm going to make it a little darker. And I just want to put a little bit of texture and dimension on those leaves because they've dried. And you'll notice that your watercolor always dries lighter when that water evaporates. So I'm going to just mix up a little bit darker paint. And I want to just darken it up a little bit. I'm just going to go over where I already painted. Mostly. Just darken it up a little bit. You see how that looks a little more interesting than the one over here? A little more saturated. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And then add some to these. Now these are still a little bit wet, so the color just kind of mixed right in.
Kris, someone's writing that they have a hard time getting the pointy ends of the leaves.
Do you have a brush that points at the tip? if your brush doesn't point at the tip, you're gonna have a hard time getting pointy leaves. And if you, here, I'll show you on another piece of paper. If you pick up your brush, ooh, just had a canvas crash into me. Okay. If you are doing your leaf shape, which I've showed you guys before, you put the tip of your brush down, push down, and come back up. If you come back up too soon, you're going to get a dull tip on your leaf, which is fine. It just gives a different leaf shape. But the last thing on your paper should be just the very, 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 very tip of your brush before you pick your brush up. And that's how you get. And then if you are having trouble getting it this way, you can always draw it in to a point like that. But it's brush control and it takes a little bit of practice sometimes. And also you have to have a brush that comes to a complete tip. So if you wet your brush and you pinch it, let's see. Wow, I keep dropping everything today. Do you see how sharp the tip of that is? If your brush does not come to that sharp of a tip, you need a new brush. And sometimes your brushes will do that after some time painting. And I'm kind of rough on my brushes. I scrub back and forth a lot. So sometimes your paintbrushes will dull and it won't come to a point, and that's usually when I go out and get a new one. And I keep the old ones because they're always going to be good for something. So practice a little bit with the brush strokes. And we are going to have a Watercolor 101 class where I teach you all of the basics, and we're going to go over brush control and brushes. So I'll get deeper into that. And if you need help troubleshooting, email me and we'll take a look at your brush and figure out if it's your brush or if it's something that you're doing, and we'll get you sorted out. All right, I'm mixing up a darker, much darker green for the thorns, I guess. I've never touched one, so I don't know if it just looks thorny or if it actually is thorny. But the word thistle sounds thorny to me. Sounds like something you don't want to touch. So and the way I made those, I just used the very tip of my brush and I like just made little marks. So, and you want them facing upward and outward. So on the end, is that dry? Yeah. Just like how you do your leaves where you push down a little bit on your brush. And then I'm going to curve these on the edges out left and right. And I'll show you in a second closer up what that looks like. You just want it to give the illusion of it being spiky. Do you see those spikes? Wonder if I have a larger brush here that I can show you up close. Maybe I could show you some giant spikes. And these are the Simply Simmons, what they look like from Michaels. This is a 12. And I'm going to show you here that if I pinch it, like how I pinched the other one, it's coming up to a dull point. It's not like super pointy, and that's because this is old. Here, I'm just going to grab a color. So for your spikes, hopefully you can see this a little bit better. I'm just pushing down and coming up. So it's almost like little teeny leaves. And this is not going to get the most sharp because this brush is older. You can see? They're almost like little teeny leaves. And when I come out to the side, I kind of curve it up like so, or to the other side, I'm going to curve it that way. You might find it easier to do it towards you, so you can flip your piece around. So it's however it feels most comfortable to you. And then you want more spikes on the other side. And I'm going to move my paper around so I don't have to twist my arm. This is why I don't like to tape my brush to anything. Tape my paper to anything, sorry. So because I move it a lot. If I tape it to something, it'll have to be something small. And then when I come down here, they're just going to go up. And they're just random. If it doesn't get pointy enough, you can use the tip of your brush to help the shape along. You just want to make little random marks. This is called mark making. And just take your time and go from the bottom of the thistle to the top. It's okay if some of them touch or overlap. I'll put one more down here. And that's what it looks like. So that definitely looks like something you don't want to touch. You'll poke your finger. And then the little petals, which are like little hairs almost at the top, you're just going to flick your brush. Just small little light marks. So in terms of brush pressure, I'll go mix up some purple. Or maybe I'll use this pinky purple. You can use red. Add a tiny little bit of blue to it if you want. So in terms of your brush pressure, if I press really hard, I get a thick line. If I release that pressure and don't like put all my hand weight on, I can get a lighter stroke, a really light stroke. So if you just use the tips of your fingers, kind of like you're using chopsticks almost, and you just flick your brush, you get those hair-like strokes. Like that. That's how you make the top. So you're not pushing your whole brush down like that. You're just you're holding the brush really low down, so you have a lot of control. The further back you hold your brush, the less control you have. You hold it here, you have a lot of control. And then you just want to gently, do you see this motion that I'm making? I'm just flicking the brush. And that's how I get those little fine shapes. So the thistle kind of goes outward a little bit. So you just want to start your outward ones first to establish that boundary. Like, all right, this is as far as it's going to go. on this side, and this is as far as I want it to go on this side. And it could be different for you. I mean, you could make a giant crazy thistle if you wanted to. And then you start filling in the middle. If you get too tall, that's okay. You can match the other strokes to meet it. And then as I get closer to this side, I'm just going to angle it a little bit to match that angle. And there's your thistle. And I sort of painted on this postcard sized piece of paper. Wouldn't that be fun to paint that and then flip it over, write a note, and you can mail it to somebody? That would be a cute gift. Or even, this is kind of cool to cut around, and I would like that as a bookmark, actually. I can never have enough bookmarks. Ever. And when this dries, if you want to go over it with a second layer, you can. So it'll deepen it up a little bit. It depends on how light your paint dries. And if you use a lot of water, your paint's going to be almost pastel. So it depends on how you want to do that. You make that decision because it's your painting and you make it your own. But I think that's an adorable little thistle. I don't know. Is anybody else obsessed with wildflowers this time of year? When you drive around and look at all the pretty wildflowers that popped up, especially in the middle of the road.
Very different than the ones that were out in the spring, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And
Mhm.
it's really interesting to observe both of them. I love it when I see them somewhere that I could pull over and actually look at them. People probably think I'm nuts all the time taking pictures of wildflowers on the side of the road. I honestly can't believe I haven't dropped my phone on the side of the road, like sticking it out of the car window. Probably not the safest thing to do.
That's funny, Kris.
I'll give you guys a couple minutes to finish that, and then we'll move on to the clover. And if all of this dried even lighter than you thought and you want to go in with another layer, you absolutely can. Just do it the same way we did the leaves. And if you're not sure what your paint's going to look like, if that concerns you, you can always keep scratch paper on. I always keep extra paper to test my colors, to see how something's going to dry, or to practice something before I actually paint on my piece. When I was in high school, my teacher would make us draw a little margin with our ruler. And that would be the area that we would test our colors to see, if we liked the mix or how dark our paint was and stuff like that. And they ended up being like really pretty little tiny abstract paintings when we were done. So that might be something fun too. All right, we're going to put aside the thistle and we're going to go to the clover. It's a different shape, but it's pretty much all the concepts that we learned in that first one. They all are just variations of each other in terms of how you construct them in watercolor. Okay, so for this one, the stem is actually brown. If you have brown, great. If not, you can mix orange and blue together slowly until you get a shade of brown that you like. I had some brown on my palette, so I'm just going to go with that. This was orange and blue mixed together because for some reason it never occurred to me to put brown in my palette. Totally missed that until recently. I'm like, I keep mixing brown all the time. I need to get a brown paint that I like. So these pre-mixed colors that you can buy, they're called convenience colors, and they're wonderful, but a lot of people just like to use the basic colors and mix all of their colors custom. So you really don't need a whole lot of paints to start. And when we do the 101 class, I'll bring out just a palette of just the basics so you can start building your kit. All right, so we're going to draw, it's just a stick basically. I'm easing up the pressure as I get closer because I just want it to be a little bit thinner on top. So I pressed down with my brush, and then as I came up to the top of it, I sort of just backed off a little bit. And for this one, I'm going straight into the top of the clover. I think it's actually a red clover. There's different clovers. It's so fascinating to see what different wildflowers exist in different areas as well. Okay, so the way we do this clover, it's basically the same flicking motion as the top of the thistle, except you'll notice it's sort of like a rounded rectangle. Rectangle, a rounded triangular shape. See? It's just softer. So you want to build it out on the side. And that didn't come out as sharp as I like, so I just took the tip of my brush and fill that in, and then you want to come up the other side. And that's as wide as it's going to be. So you establish that boundary. And then you want to go up here and kind of put in 2 or 3 little flicks. And that's as high, that's as tall as it's going to be. And then you want to fill in sort of along that triangle that you established. And you just want to flick from the center out. So just be kind of mindful. If you go out too far, no big deal. And that's how I got that side of the triangle. So you can see here, this pink pigment that I'm using is actually a more inexpensive paint. And I think you can see that I've gone back into it several times, more so than I did with these paints over here. So when you do buy the paints that are a little, that are a better quality, you also do use a little bit less. And then you want to do the same exact thing on the other side. You want to go outwards. And create that shape. And then you just want to keep building to the left and to the right, and then up towards the middle. And you don't want to leave too much white space. So if there's some areas that you missed, just go back and cover it up a little bit. And just keep filling both sides in. And remember, really light strokes. If you put your hand down on your paper, that gives you a little stability versus kind of holding it up in the air. That really helps a lot. And again, if your paint starts drying and it's too light, you can go over it with another layer of paint. Like so. And on this one, you can see the middle is a little darker. You can just go over it when it's dry, or you can mix up a little bit of a deeper version of whatever color you're using. So for instance, I'm going to use this magenta color that I was using before. And I'm going to mix a little red into it. And a little purple. And that'll darken it up. And I'm going to wait for it to dry a little bit more because I don't want it all to blend together. You can see that shine on there. It's really wet. I'm going to give that a minute. We can actually, while that layer is drying, we can put in our leaves. And these leaves are a little brighter green than the thistle. I'm going to mix up a brighter shade of green. You can add a little bit more yellow to yours if you're doing yellow and blue. Or whatever green you have will work. I'm going to take a little bit of the blue green and put it in here to brighten it up, but if you have blue, you can add your blue. It was a little too yellowy. And this is our simple basic leaf shape that if you've taken my class before, you know how to do, and I'll show you. You put your tip down, tip of your brush down. I have my brush at a 45-degree angle. What that means is that's the angle to my paper. So my brush is not up like this, it's like that. So you want to put the tip of your brush down, then you want to push down and then come back up until just the tip of the brush is left on the paper, and then you pick up your brush. You don't want to pick up your brush sooner. So the tip of the brush, you want to push down and pick it back up. Tip of the brush, push down and pick it back up. And that's how you also get those variations in color because of your brush pressure. And I'm just putting in 3 leaves, but feel free to put in as many as you want. I'll put one there. I'm going to put one angled a little more downward. And then I'll put one out here. And again, we're going to let these dry. Then we'll decide if it needs more color. We can go over it with another layer. Okay, so the middle of my flower is dry, the end is not. I'm gonna carefully put some middle pieces in there with that darker color that I mixed up. Some of it's wet, some of it's dry, so some of it's gonna blend and some of it's just gonna stay there. That's good, as long as the whole thing's not wet, because I don't want the whole thing to blend. And if that confuses you with painting over a wet area or painting when it's dry, all of that will be covered in the 101 class that we're going to be doing. And that's the clover. I'm gonna let you guys finish, and I'm also gonna let it dry to see if it's gonna dry too light. So when I paint for you guys to be able to see, I paint darker than I usually would when I paint things myself. I like to paint everything in lightly and then go back in and put a second layer, but I don't always put my second layer all over the whole shape. I might just put it on parts of the shape. That way you have different varying degrees of dark and light, and that's really interesting visually to look at. That's what makes your painting interesting to look at. Anybody have any questions?
No questions yet, Kris, but I did type in the chat box the date of that Watercolor 101
Oh, perfect.
class,
Thank you.
September 3rd at 4 o'clock.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, September already. What? I feel like August was like 5 seconds long. I think my Clover is drying to where I'm pretty happy with it. But when we're done all four, I'm going to go back and look at it and see because it's still a little damp. I'm going to mix up some more brown paint. I'm just picking up some orange and some blue. That's just how I like to mix my browns. Different people might use different colors to get to it. All right, so we're on to the Aster now, which is this purple guy. So I did 3 different stems, 1 main stem and 3 coming off. If you want to do more, you can go crazy and do a lot, but I think 3 is plenty. And then I had put 3 leaves, but if you want to put more leaves, you can. So there is a yellow center with a few little greenish dots of pollen around it, and then little tiny purple petals. If you don't have purple pre-mixed, you can mix together pink and blue or red and blue to get a shade of purple that you like. So just mix those colors together and test them on your scratch paper until you like the color. All right. So I'm going to duplicate the shape that I originally painted. So I've got 1 stem going this way. And then I had 1 come off at the top. And I made it a little too thick, so I'm going to thicken up the bottom to match. And I have one coming off of this side. Then a little lower down, I had one coming off of there. So wherever you want to make your little branches, go ahead and do that. If you want more than 3 flowers, you could go ahead and do that too. The bottom of my stem got a little light because it's already dry, so I'm just going to put another layer like so. So it just basically looks like a stick right now. And we're going to use some purple. Making sure I have enough mixed up here. I always try to use up what I have on my palette first. Okay, so for this one, it's just tiny little petals that you want to draw. So, and they come off of a round center. So these I actually paint them, I draw them in. So I'll do a, yikes, put my hand in paint. I'm going to do a larger one so you can see what I do. You can just use your brush and sort of just lay it down like that if you wanted to, but I like that rounder shape. So let's go here. I actually draw it with the tip of my brush like so. There you go. You can see it like that. And then I fill it in. So it's a little thicker up here and a little thinner down there. Looks like an insect wing. I'll do one more. It's almost like just drawing a loop. Thinner on the bottom, a little bit thicker as you come up to the top. And then you fill it in. Like so. Oh, I'm mixing up purple and didn't put my centers in. So I'm just going to take some yellow. Or you can take a little bit of orange and yellow, or put a little bit of red in your yellow. And then you just want to estimate where the yellow is going to be. So I'm just going to put a yellow circle in here. And I made the circle kind of rough. It's not really round. You can also do dots if you wanted to in a circular shape. Kind of like that. So you want to estimate where the middle of the circle will be. And it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Often if you look at the middle of flowers, they're usually not. All right, so now I'm going back into that pretty purple. Which I think I need to mix a little bit more. And it's okay if your purples kind of vary throughout the flower. It's okay. It's your flower. It's your version of an aster, right? It's not the actual aster flower that you picked outside. All right. And then radiating from that center, you want to start drawing those little loops. And they're pretty thin loops. If you wanted to, you can draw like 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock. If that'll help you orient yourself, draw it like the hands of a clock. fine. If that'll help you, instead of drawing one right next to the other. So now you know that all you have to do is fill in between each one. And you want to get fairly close to that center, or you can wait till it's dry. And then you start filling in those in-between petals. And they don't have to be perfect at all. Some of them can touch, it's totally fine. And it starts looking like that. And it's gonna look a little weird until you fill it in some more. It's gonna look like it was in a windstorm for a little bit. I'm not going to put in those little green dots until the purple is dry. Oops, got some more fuzz. And that's my first one. I'm just going to work my way around. If anybody has any questions while we work, you can ask.
I'll just jump in to say that the program is being recorded and will be on the library YouTube page next week, early next week, hopefully.
I have to say, a lot of people have been telling me that they've been looking at the recordings and painting along with the recordings. So that's great that you guys do that. All right, and I'm almost done filling these in. And then I'll do the leaves. And I don't think that my paint's going to be dry enough after the leaves to put in those green middles yet. So I might set it aside while we paint the next one. That's what it looks like before the leaves. Now, when I did the sample, I only put leaves below the flowers, but I'm assuming they also can come off the top. The picture that I took didn't have that on there, but I don't see why not. It's your art piece, so you can actually embellish however you want to. If you decide that you want your plant to have different leaves, go ahead and put different leaves on it. That's your artistic license. And these leaves are the exact same as the others, except there's a little bit of a curve in them, and I'll show you how to do that. So this is your regular leaf. The tip push down and the tip, because these are a little bit longer, right? But these sort of, when you push down, you kind of curve your brush. And then at the end of that curve is when you pick up like that. So instead of going straight like that, you push down and you curve your brush and you pick it back up to get that slight downward curve. I'm going to put one at the bottom going down. I want it a little bit bigger, so I have to push harder on my brush if I want it to come out wider, right? Then this one sort of curves up. I'm going in the opposite direction, like so. And then this one curves way up. So we're gonna go like that. Same technique, you just have to curve your hand. Gives those leaves a little bit of character too.
That is the most beautiful color, purple.
Thanks.
Kris, someone said in one of your earlier classes you mentioned masking fluid. What is that used for?
So I don't have any because I haven't used it in a really long time, but what masking fluid does is it preserves an area of white on your paper, typically white. You don't typically mask over a color, but you can. If you are doing that, it has to be really, really dry. So what masking fluid is, it's kind of like glue almost, and you paint it onto your paper. And you have to wash your brush really good. And you should always use a crappy brush for this. Never use a good brush. You know, get one of those throwaway brushes from the craft store. And you want to, say for instance, I wanted a white line through the leaves. I would have painted that line with the masking fluid before I painted my leaf, and I would let it dry completely, and then I'd paint my leaf over it. And what that does, it creates a resist, so the paint resists wherever your masking fluid is, and then it's kind of satisfying because you just peel it up right after and you see the white paper beneath. So any area that you want to preserve that you don't want another color over, you can use masking fluid for that. It's actually kind of fun to just make random masking fluid shapes, and then you paint over it and then you peel it all off. It's really satisfying. And you can find masking fluid at Michael's or any craft store or online. So it's just really used to preserve an area that you want to remain white. Or if I wanted like this to remain purple, and maybe I wanted to like do a background of like crazy color, you could do that, but you'd have to make sure that your paint was really, 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 really dry. And I always recommend testing your masking fluid because some are just strange, and if you leave it on too long, it won't pick up properly, or it might rip your paper. I don't really use it. I've used it before, but I don't really use it a whole lot. And some of them now come with little fine tips on it, so that you can draw with it too, which is neat. But the brand I use, I think it was called Misket Frisket, because a lot of times it's called Liquid Frisket too. So I think the one that I used was Misket Frisket. That was so long ago. The only reason I stopped using it is that I didn't use it enough, and so every time I bought one, it would dry up really quickly, and I would end up with just a brick of glue, essentially. But it's fun to play with, so try it. So while we chatted, this actually dried enough for me to go ahead and put the little green details on. So what I'm going to do is grab some green paint, and I'm not watering it down because I want it to show. I'm picking up quite a lot of it on my brush. And then you just want to, wherever you have white space on that, you just want to put dots of green around it. So between the petals and the yellow, just want to put a few little green dots all the way around. Did I answer your masking fluid question well enough? I feel like I kind of muddled through that one.
While we're waiting for that person to answer, someone else said, I heard in a different class. Yes, she said that answered her question.
Awesome.
About masking fluid. I heard in a different class about a funny brush that is like rubber bands. Have you used it?
A funny brush that's like rubber bands. I know there are brushes that are just full rubber, but I don't know about rubber bands. That sounds really cool though. There are rubber tipped brushes. I don't have any of them, but those, I've seen them everywhere at Michael's and stuff, and you can do really fun effects with those. You can scratch through your wet paint. You can use it to draw really fine lines. And that's the only rubber-esque brush that I can think of, but I'm not sure if that's what that teacher was speaking about. Sounds cool though. So now that my leaves are dry, I'm actually just going to put a vein on the leaf. You don't have to do this, but it's just something you can do. And all I'm doing is taking a darker green on my brush and down the middle of the leaf, just following the shape of the leaf with really light pressure. I just put a little line on there just to make it interesting. You don't have to do it. And when you do stuff like that, if you steady your hand, put the base of your hand down on the table, it helps to give you a little bit of control. And of course, hold your brush close to the top for detail work. And you can move your paper around so that your hand doesn't end up in your previous set of green. And that just gives a fun look to it. You don't have to do it. And that's our Aster. Anybody have any questions so far before we go on to the next one? I'm going to give you guys a minute. I think while we're waiting, I'm going to give you guys a minute to finish, but I think I want a little more definition on this leaf, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to mix up a little bit of a darker green, just slightly darker. And I'm sort of just going to use my brush as a stamp. So I'm not going to come down the whole leaf with my second color. I just want to stamp it on. You can imagine that with the flower there, this is going to be the darkest part of the leaf because it's getting light out here, but it's not getting any light here. So I just want to darken up this part, not the bottom. So I'm just going to put the tip of my brush right where I started that leaf, and I'm just going to push down. And I just want to darken the top, just like that. And I'm not blending anything. I just want it to darken up just the top. And I'm just sort of stamping with my brush. And that first stamp came out kind of really dark, so I'm going to stamp over it, and that'll pick up some of that extra paint. And that's how I darkened that up. Do you see how that gave it a little more character and a little bit more 3D effect? Because this is covering up the light, so the ends of the leaves are getting light, but not the top. And I also think I want to darken up the base of the stem. Not dark enough brown for me. Because that's also going to be close to the ground. It's not getting a whole lot of light, right? I'm just going to go over the bottom. And I'm not taking it the whole way up. And that just gave it a little more dimension too. My light's really bright, so it's washing some of it out. So there you go. That's better. Holding it at an angle, you can see a little bit better. And if you wanted to do that with any of the others, you can look at it and decide if you want something darker. And I kind of do here. So what you can even do is, I'm going to darken up that stem. And I'm going to darken up the bottom part of that leaf. And half. So I'm going to draw a line in the middle of that long piece. And I'm just going to fill in below that line. Not super dark, but dark enough that I got a two-tone effect. Do you see how the top is lighter and the bottom is darker? That just gives it even more depth and dimension. I think I'm going to do it over on this side, except I'm only going to go with the stem and the very bottom leaf. I'm not going to go halfway through the other one. You could even darken up the base of this top part here if you wanted to, and then take that down the stem carefully. Or even these tiny little pieces. Just darken up the base. That thunder scared the daylights out of me. And there we go. And every layer that you put on is going to give a little bit more visual interest to it. And if you let things dry before you layer them up, then you have less chance of making something muddy. Okay, now we're gonna go for the Rudbeckia or Black-Eyed Susan, and I'm sure most people have these in their yard. Super pretty. So this one has a dark brown center, some yellow petals. This leaf shape is a little bit different, and I'll show you how we draw it. So it has a little bit, and there are different versions, different species of these that have different leaves, but most of them have sort of a serrated edge, but not too much. It's not like super sharp. At least
Kris,
the one.
when you do that, would it be possible to also show how to get that thin vein again?
Yeah, absolutely, because
Okay.
there's a thin vein there, so that'll be
Yeah.
perfect.
That's what I thought. Great.
Totally. No worries. All right, so let's get some dark brown going. So you can mix your orange and your blue together. And I'm going to put a little black in here because I want it to be really dark brown. All right. And you want to make sort of like a gumdrop shape. I'm just sort of doing the outside dots. And they're not usually this uniform. I'm just drawing it just so I can get the shape of it. And like I said, if you need to draw this in pencil before you do it, please go ahead and do that. All right, so now that I have the shape established, more or less, I can just kind of put some random blobs in there because I don't want them to be too perfect, like little perfect dots. I want it to be more like blobs with some of them running together, just a little bit more organic shaped, like so. Maybe some less white space in there because there's usually not, but I left a little bit so that it will show texture like that. And then when I do these petals around it, I'm going to be really careful to not touch that yellow into the brown, or else the brown paint will flow into the yellow, which is fine and it could look nice, but actually I'm going to do one on purpose so you can see what happens. How about that? Gonna grab some yellow. And I'm gonna start over here, and it's just a leaf shape. So it's like your basic leaf shape. Put the tip of your brush down, push down, and come back up. And you want it off to an angle on the side. So I'm gonna push this one. I'm gonna make the tip on purpose touch that brown paint. And you can see here that some of that brown is sort of like bleeding into the yellow a little bit, and some of the yellow is bleeding into the brown. I don't know if you could actually see that. It doesn't always happen so gracefully. Sometimes it just like flies out. Yes, please pardon my sound effects. Sometimes it just like flows right into it. Sometimes it takes some time. I kind of like when that happens, but some colors like yellow, you might not want other colors mixing with. So I put one out on the side, one on the other side, because these tend to sometimes sort. There's different kinds, but the one that I'm drawing kind of goes down cone flower shaped. So I've got two petals hanging down, and I'm just going to put a few more in between. So I'm just doing leaf shapes. The tip of my brush, push down. This one's going to go a little more straight down, I think. And I think I want one more here. It wasn't wide enough for my liking. Oh, this is so pretty. I love these so much. I think I made my cone a little bit too big. That's okay. Yeah, I got carried away with my cone, but it's fine. This one's just a little conier. Then I'll put a little bit of a green stem coming off the bottom, and it's just straight down. And then for the leaf, put a little bit of a stem, and then I do a large leaf shape. Just draw in 2 different sides, upper and lower, and then I fill that in. And then to get that shape, not pointy enough, there we go. To get that shape, it's sort of stair-stepped. So I put the tip of my brush on the side of the shape and pull down. So you can see it's a little bit off of the shape, and I'll do it again. And then I do another one and I pull down. I'm going to do that with a larger brush so you can see it bigger. And then I do it on the other side. And then you can clean anything up with the tip of your brush. While this dries, so I can show you the vein again, I'm going to do another leaf for you with the larger brush. Mix with a lot of green. These larger brushes take a lot more paint. Okay. So what you want to do is draw a leaf shape, just like that. And you fill it in, right? Then you take your brush. Oops. Well, we're going to start that again because my brush crashed into my paper. Draw your leaf shape. Fill it in. You see how easy my shape fills in? It's because I use enough water and paint on my brush. If I didn't have enough water on there, I wouldn't be able to fill it in because that line that I would have drawn to get the shape of the leaf would have already been dried. And when I started filling it in, you'll still see the outline of it. Okay, so then what I do is orient my paper this way. And then I just put my brush. Do you see how the tip of my brush is just facing outside of the edge of that? You can already see that I'm going to have a little bit of a jagged shape if I push down. And then I connect that line to where my leaf started. So I just plop my brush down, a little bit of an angle, and then followed that shape like so. Do you see how that has a little bit of an edge there? And then you go above it and you do the same thing. You're just basically stamping with your brush. And then you pull down and you follow that leaf shape. And that's how you get those jagged edges. You might have to practice this. I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do it on the bottom, stamp and pull down. I already know this one's not too pointy because this brush is older. Pick up some more paint. And don't be afraid to use paint and water. It's watercolor. It'll dry. Stamp and pull down. And that's how you get that shape with the little jagged edges. Does everybody get that? I know it's a little bit different. And you can use the tip of your brush to move your paint around if you want it to be more even. But I like when it's sort of blobby and looks different. Does anybody want me to do that one more time, or are we good? I'm trying to dry this leaf.
No one's saying to do it again.
Do it again. All
Well,
right.
can you do it one more time? We have a request.
Doing it one more time. We have enough space right here. Let me mix up a darker shade. That might be easier for you guys to see as well. I'm trying to angle it away from the light so you can see. Sorry for all the mixing noises. All right, we have a much darker color. This is going to be better. You want to draw a leaf shape. So arc up top, arc on the bottom. Fill it in. Okay, then you orient your paper this way so that the top and the bottom of the leaf are facing in this direction. Then you want to load your brush with paint again. And when I go into my paint, I sort of roll my brush to get it to as much of a tip as possible. This one's not going to get a sharp tip because it's older, but it'll get somewhat sharp. And then what you want to do is angle it out. So it's not in the middle. It's actually facing, oops, there's a lot of water on there. It's facing the outside of the leaf shape. You can actually see that. You can see where it's going to land and give you that little jagged edge there. So you want to stamp, and then you want to connect it with the bottom of the leaf. So you just drag your brush backwards like so. You see how you got that little jagged bit there? And then you want to go up here, and then you want it to connect. So you come back down. Now, if you wanted a lot of jagged edges, like say for instance you were doing a rose, you would just keep stamping. But for this, it's just a couple jagged areas. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to angle my brush out, stamp, pull it back to where that leaf started. You can always use the tip of your brush to clean anything up if you want to. Then I'm going to come back up here, stamp again, and connect it to where the corner of that leaf, that little hoop, the serrated edge met the leaf, and pull backwards. And if you want to take your brush and fill it all in so it's neat, you can do that. And that's how you get that leaf. So if it was like a rose leaf, I'm going to hurry here because we only have a couple more minutes. If it was a rose leaf, here, I'm going to use a smaller brush. And you had a lot of jagged edges, you're just going to want to stamp like that the whole way down. So you get a lot of jagged edges, like so. So coming back to this guy, he's dry enough-ish for me to put a line. And all you want to do for your line is you want to follow the shape of your leaf. So this one pretty much goes straight. This one curved, so we took the line down and across. So for this one, you want to make sure it's a darker, a little bit darker color, darker shade. And you just want to go from where you want to connect the stem to the tip of the leaf, and you want to put your hand down and steady it. So you're just moving these 3 fingers like chopsticks. And you just want to put the lightest pressure ever and connect those 2 lines as best you can. like so. The top of the line's so wet you can't see it on the thing. I promise you, it connects the whole way. There we go. And those are your wildflowers. We have just a minute or two left. Does anybody have any questions? I hope you guys had fun today. Thank you so much for joining us on your Friday evening, Friday afternoon.
Kris, do the jagged edges need to be done when the leaf is wet?
Yes, because if you wait, then you're just going to end up with a leaf shape and then just the jagged edges sticking out. If you do them when it's already dry, you're going to just have to take another layer of paint and cover over the whole thing so it looks neat.